You're listening to The Dan Nicholl Show.
My very special guest on the Dan Nicholl Show this week, I like to think has flown all the way to South Africa just to get onto the show, but I think he also wanted to have a bit of a look at where we find ourselves today, because this is the very first IWC boutique in Africa. IWC being a brand that I've worked with for many years now, but I've also seen support the Laureate Sport for Good Foundation so extraordinarily over the years, and so I am absolutely delighted to have Chris Grainger-Herr with me. Welcome.
Wow, what an intro. Thank you for having me, Dan.
In a country
I can't live up to that.
I have no doubt you will. You've actually had a little bit of time here. You've had a week here. This will be a highlight, of course, seeing the store.
Yeah, absolutely.
But being in Africa and Africa having such a direct link to the IWC brand, it's always a pretty cool trip to be able to do.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a beautiful country every single time. You know, it's home away from home in many ways. And obviously for us to finally have our own store here as well, be in this environment, it's very special. So we're always looking forward to this week here.
Now, you're well placed to say that South Africa is great to visit, because if you follow Chris Grainger-Herr on Instagram, you're normally in 8 to 10 countries a week as you travel around the world. It's an extraordinary role that you have, but you do get to see a huge amount of the world.
Yeah.
We're often very proud of South Africa as insiders. From the outside view, what is the magic of South Africa for you?
Well, I think it's that combination of it's the right balance, I think, between a welcoming vibe, beautiful nature, weather, gastronomy, whatever you want that makes you feel better, you find in South Africa. And, you know, there are countries that are, you know, none to be named, but some countries are difficult, like in sense of like things are difficult. And South Africa always strikes me as a place where you can just, you know, you feel at ease immediately. You know, some countries are like, you know, where you literally arrive also if you're just on a business trip and you have a murder schedule, and at least it's not, you know, you're not getting additionally aggravated by sort of the environment being difficult. And this is something I love, and the people are great.
Well, we're very glad to hear that. Yeah. And I'm very glad that you get to have a chance. I was here for the opening last year. It's your chance to have a look at, I think you have been here before, but to have a look at this boutique. And I think it's a really special edition in more ways than one, because to have the first one on the continent finally touched down, it is a really special store. Yeah,
it is that. And of course, we've seen over, you know, recent years, I think our customers' expectations have evolved hugely. And I think when you look back maybe 20 years ago, where everything was purely down to multi-brand distribution, and you see what happened during COVID then, when people's engagement with watchmaking has really increased, and we've ended up with lots and lots of people who became new watch fans and who accumulated an incredible knowledge. You know, that puts us to shame most of the time, because we now frequently face customers that know our history much better than we do, and every little technical detail. And they go, "So Chris, you know, how do you do the height adjustment of the spiral hairspring?" You know, like, "Oh, whoa, okay." So you have a lot more of that. And then obviously after COVID, we've seen people's longing to have a much richer experience in physical retail. You know, people return to shops in a big way. I think we've seen the biggest luxury watch store building boom ever in this industry. And it's great to bring that to many more cities, including Joburg now, and to have it's a complementary ecosystem. It's not that it's boutiques versus multi-brand, one or the other, and e-com is either or. It really has become a very complementary way of setting up the distribution. And, you know, some customers really are now looking for these fully branded environments where they can immerse themselves into the history, the technicality of the brand, all of the details, and where the storytelling comes to life as well. And at the end of the day, you know, we make a product that nobody needs, you know, from a technical perspective, but it's a highly emotional product. And it's a product that people really want to connect a story to. You know, it's not that many things that we own that we really care about in terms of, you know, the material things that we own. But watches, they always have that unique ability to tell a story, but they also have a unique ability to connect people. And that is something that a boutique is really great for, because often we see friendships, you know, forming between our customers, you know, our sales colleagues. And it's just a place to, you know, share the love for these mechanical timepieces and hopefully make great friends and have a good time.
It's a world you yourself have become well immersed in, but it wasn't always the likely end space, given what you studied and how you studied. However, before we look at that architecture background, if you go back even further than that, there was a very clear sign that the watch world would be your future, because you had a dog called Patek Philippe, didn't you?
Well, it wasn't an actual dog. It was a stuffed little toy dog. But yeah, this was the story of my dad getting into watches. And I think my dad at the time So it would have been mid-80s. His dream was always to own a Patek Philippe. We had a holiday home in Switzerland at the time, and one day on the way back from said holiday home, we stopped in the city of Bern, and there was a jeweler called Siegeli and If, and you could, back in those days, walk into a jeweler's and just pick a Nautilus and steel and pay for it and leave. It's quite different today. And it took like what seemed to me absolute ages. It seemed to me like I'd waited for hours in there and I'd looked at these watches. And, as a sort of a thank you from my dad, he bought me from some tourist shop. He bought me this, the Bernese rescue dog that we named Patek Philippe. And my youngest daughter, she's nearly 9 now, nearly 8 now, but she still has it, still called
the
Patek
same
Philippe.
one.
Yeah, still around. And that really set me off. And then a little bit later at university, actually on the way to where my lectures took place, there was a multi-brand retailer on that road. And this is the first time I really connected with IWC, and I saw the display in the window, and I loved the purity and that kind of engineered feel and the clarity of these dials and that instrument nature. And it was all a bit understated and sort of black and white, and it really spoke to me. I just thought they're all too massive, they're all way too big, So that was sort of my starting point in watchmaking.
I think we had a very similar point of connection, because the first watches I really fell in love with from IWC were the Portofinos and the Pilots. I don't like too much of a cluttered aesthetic, and there was just something so clean and striking that said, come and get me.
Yeah, I think so. I think when you look back at, in our history, we don't come from an artisanal background. This has never been a sort of métier d'art as a starting point. Florentine Aristo-Jones, back in the 1860s, he was an American from Boston, and he was actually an engineer and an entrepreneur. And he wanted to combine that industrialized way of making watches in the US with that great craftsman quality you found in Switzerland, and really make movements for the US-American market. And funnily enough, that's also a story that then resulted in tariffs sort of, putting an end to that kind of business model, which is quite interesting. And Jones, he approached this from really a functional watchmaking perspective. So all of our early timepieces, from the pocket watches into the Pilots and Portugieser collections in the 1930s, they were instrument watches that were for navigation and aviation, and they were designed as form follows function, in a sense, as a very purposeful instrument. They had to be legible, they had to be robust, they had to be reliable. And I think this DNA is what lives on in what we call our engineering approach today, where we make things that are very clean in their design, they're pure, they're very well executed, but are robust and as well user-friendly. And this is something where you never create complication for complication's sake in an IWC. It's always functionally led, but then of course beautifully and sometimes playfully executed. It doesn't always have to be like super understated, but this instrument nature and that engineered nature is that guiding principle when we design a new watch.
And you're well placed to make that assessment, not just because you've seen enough of the watches, but your background, because it's not a conventional, I am going to become the CEO of a luxury watch brand story.
Yeah.
You were an architect, you were looking at interior design, and in fact you only ended up at IWC because you went off to build a museum.
Yeah, exactly. So it is really that starting point. I think it really started in my childhood. I was quite the shopaholic. I loved shops. I grew up close to Frankfurt in Germany, which had quite an American influence because of the US bases in the area. And there, of course, there were, strip malls and actual shopping malls and multiplex cinemas quite early on compared to the rest of Germany and Europe. And I think retail and that sort of immersive experience always fascinated me. I got into theme parks as soon as Disneyland Paris opened in 1992. My dad took me there in the first year, and I was just absolutely blown away by that storytelling. And I don't think I fully understood it at the time, but what it basically does, it creates a dream that ultimately has a commercial end to it, right? Because you're building sort of that story that is very, very immersive, and then you create this drive to connect with that story more deeply, which mostly ends in shopping, if we're brutally honest. That's also why the food is quite fast, because you spend more time in kind of continuous retail. But this idea of entertainment and this sort of bamboozling of people into a world where they just feel like they're really experiencing something is something that really speaks to me, because it's a very honest form of entertainment. It doesn't pretend to sort of reinvent culture or anything like that, but it gives you something that's very reliable, and you have that storytelling element translated into something that you can buy into and that you can take home. And And that for me was always something that really fascinated me. And then later through the design side of things, I also got into shop design quite early on. And then especially watches and hard luxury, I liked it because it had the technical complexity of a museum or gallery, because watch display is not like fashion on a hanger on a rail. You really have to think about lighting, presentation, angles, the color rendition. There's a lot of technical stuff to it, and that spoke to me. And of course, shops being storytelling platforms spoke to me. And that's, I think, how I ended up in an interior design practice in Zurich that did shops, and how ultimately we got the phone call from Richemont at the time to say, would you like to pitch for a museum in IWC? And I remember clear as day, I walked into IWC the first day back in 2005, and I loved the people, I loved the atmosphere, and I had this distinct feeling, I never want to leave here. And that's been continuously going on to today.
If I'd said on that very day to this dashing young architect with a faint hint of a Bournemouth accent that you would 2 decades later or thereabouts be the CEO of IWC, would you have given that any credence at the time?
No, totally not. It's also, I was maybe in the very lucky position that sort of the career progression always overtook my ambitions by quite some mileage. So I haven't really had the time to really consider that sort of thing too much. There was a point probably where I felt this could happen one day, when I started to work more on sort of, typical sort of chief of staff, strategic assistant type things. But no, I had no idea. I thought I was going to, in the beginning, originally I wanted to be a pharmacist and draw things during night shifts when I'm sitting there waiting for customers looking for that aspirin fix in the night. But, it already was a long shot to get into a creative university course and then to be able to work in that field. I think out of the 50 odd people I studied with on the course, maybe a handful ended up actually working in interior design. So that was already lucky. And then, getting into the watch industry, getting into IWC, and then everything happening, it's probably good that I didn't have too much time to consider it, because I probably would have panicked, to be quite honest.
I'm sure you would have made a very competent pharmacist, but amongst the things that might not have happened, other than having a great watch collection, you probably wouldn't have a best mate called Lewis Hamilton if you'd stayed as pharmacist. And I say that slightly frivolously, but it has become a really cool part of not just your journey, but also the brand journey, where you have a whole lot of guys. You look at Lewis, I think Bradley Cooper's another great example. People are not just, here's someone famous, we'll give them some money and some watches and ask them to say nice things. You have this relationship with people who have a genuine love of the brand, of the product, and they're watch nerds really at heart.
Yeah, I think it's really important to. We've always, this comes from different angles. First of all, it's about authenticity, as you say. It's not about paying somebody to just turn up somewhere and wear a watch, but it's also about the ability in the end to really leverage that storytelling component of a partnership. Because yes, you can do a photo shooting with somebody and put them in an ad and put it everywhere. That's the easy part. But if you want to, our business is all about creating that depth, that level of immersion. And again, you have customers who are maybe not interested at all. They want to see the watch, buy the watch, have the watch, don't care about anything to do with motorsport or with Lewis or with Toto or anything like that. But there's other customers who are looking for that richness of experience, who want to have all these different storyline touch points. And to be able to do that with somebody, you have to have a versatile brand ambassador that wants to push the limits a little bit. And when you think about, the example of Lewis Hamilton, over the years, we did golf challenges with him in Miami. We did basketball for Dibia Dream for the charity. Also, Laurie is involved there in Miami. We had him drag race Glenn Powell in a jet out in Texas. We had him space training with the Polaris crew right in Montana before going to the Qatar Grand Prix. I think it was Bahrain? Yeah, Bahrain it was. And so you need somebody who's ready to really go a bit further than just posing for a picture or attending an event. And this is what we're looking for, and that's why that genuine relationship is important, because you have to feel comfortable. And something we managed to do with Lewis over time is that he could rely on us knowing what is important to him. And that gave him the confidence to be relaxed around us and to take a bit of a lead when it comes to what we're going to do. And I think when you've got your guard up all the time, because it's your personality, it's your personal reputation on the line, you're never going to go there, right? You will go to your photo opportunities and meet and greets and so on, but you won't go that extra step of saying, you know what, that's a cool idea, let's do it. And for that, you need that trust in each other. And that only comes with personal connection, and only comes over time.
And that personal connection is really, really strong. I've seen it at play. You and Lewis aren't just two people who do some work together. There was a genuine friendship that built up there.
Well, it is mainly two people doing work together, but I think two people doing work together that trust each other and that have known each other for long enough to make that natural. I don't, I have no ambition to be best friends with everybody. That's not always the point, but I do think that you notice quite quickly whether you can connect with somebody. I remember clear as day when I first met Toto at testing in Barcelona, and we sat down for coffee, and after 5 minutes we knew this is going to work. And you have other times when you meet somebody who would be a great ambassador, a great partner, and you can just sense you're never going to find that level of connection. Right? And it doesn't have to always be friendship, but just professionally that you can sort of believe in what each other are doing. That's key.
It was a very long-running partnership, and it was spectacularly successful.
Yeah.
You're still in the motorsport space, not just with the Mercedes AMG team, but there's a rather cool movie that is about to come out, and appropriately, the headline act, I think it was Brad Pitt's wardrobe in Ocean's 11. That's very much that Chris Grainger-Herr look, all clean lines and very enviable. You've had the chance now to work in this space. Tell me about that process and bringing IWC into what's just about the biggest movie of the year.
Yeah. There's a couple of angles there. I mean, firstly, it's in that very fickle world of automotive and watch partnerships. We're really proud that our history of Mercedes AMG really goes back longer than any other partnership in this space. Over 20 years now. I think we started in 2005 or thereabouts with Mercedes AMG, and then added the Formula One team in 2013. And it's really sort of a multi-level partnership. And of course, it turned out that both the Mercedes team as the car providers as well as Lewis Hamilton as a producer were going to be involved in this F1 movie project. So that's one angle that made perfect sense. But the other angle is that when I got into the whole creative space, I grew up with the action movies of the mid to late 1990s. Right? And this is when the big cinemas arrived in my hometown. And, there was a combination of producer and composer that went above and beyond anything else, and that was at the time Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer, now Jerry Bruckheimer, and Hans Zimmer. And the movie that changed everything for me was The Rock, Nicolas Cage, Alcatraz, Sean Connery, that one. And I watched this, I think, probably 15 times in the cinema, and I kept seeing this Bruckheimer, Don Simpson production logo, and bought the CD with Hans's music on, and this really inspired me massively on so many levels. And then we had a chance a few years ago, basically when I came into this job, we suddenly heard that Top Gun was going to get a remake. And this was when I was completely new to Hollywood. I'd worked briefly on Jurassic World, but I had no ideas how Hollywood worked, and it was a steep learning curve. But ultimately, we managed to connect with Bruckheimer Productions, get into the movie, connect with Hans, and have that experience. And of course, meeting there Joe Kosinski. And what blew me away about Joe is that he was somebody who really believed in that craftsmanship of movie making. And yes, that's a very sort of, obviously fetched analogy between what we're doing and what they're doing. But I do think there's some truth in it, because again, it's a difference between an authentic storytelling idea and storytelling that is basically just a computer game. And it's something that Hans says very often that I think is so true. He always says, when he scores a movie, he thinks of, and he has a name for her, it's something like Deborah or something, Deborah in Manchester. So he has his whole story, this persona he's visualizing. And he says, Deborah in Manchester, on that particular night, is choosing between going out for a meal or going bowling or doing anything else, or going to the movie and spending her money to see my film. And if she's going to do that, I better give her that damn best experience I possibly can and make it worth her money and her while. And I think that is exactly that. Because if I'm in a gaming world or in a green screen computer, I can do all that at home. I can watch Netflix. So if you come to the big screen and go to the cinema, you want to have that next level of entertainment. And this is where Joe comes in and Jerry, because they will just take any subject and try and really get to the most authentic and captivating way of telling that story. And audiences can tell the difference. And the moment when that really came to me was the first day of shooting at Top Gun Maverick. They shot that canyon scene where Tom Cruise basically demonstrates to the other pilots that the mission can be flown. And this was done in the so-called Star Wars Canyon out in the Mojave Desert. And I remember they came back after half a day of shooting with a raw footage and showed it to us. And it's basically what you see in the cinema in the end. There's a bit of music and a bit of color grading, but apart from that, it is just what was actually shot with the actors in the cockpit, with the chase planes next to it. And this is the moment when I fell in love with this idea of the Kosinski movie. And at the end of Top Gun Maverick, Bruckheimer said to us, "Oh, we might be doing something with Formula One." We're like, "Okay, here." So,
We're available.
And then it all came together because there was Mercedes and there was Toto involved and Lewis involved and AMG involved and of course it being that same production trio again. And it's just been absolutely amazing. And for me, this is a completely new type of film. I cannot think of another example where a dramatized fictional storyline is directly inserted into reality and then shot in front of a real audience at a real Formula One Grand Prix, in front of a live audience that is watching every single move production makes, which is really, really unique. I can't think of anything else that is anywhere like that. And that's going to be very, very interesting to see.
I cannot wait to see how it comes out because I know all of this has happened, but I still can't quite get my head around this all playing out.
You see, it's really interesting when the trailer's launched, and this was similar for Top Gun, you have this very interesting fan reaction where on the one hand people are loving it, but on the other hand saying, "That's not true, this is a 2023 Ferrari in a 2024 race, this can't be." I said, "It's Hollywood, guys, it's not a documentary." So it's so close to reality that then these tiny little technical details suddenly become a big deal because the nerds are looking at it and go, inaccurate. And I said, "Guys, it's storytelling, it's not supposed to be factually correct." But when you get to that limit where it's really sort of blending reality and fiction, you are in that kind of space where you're not quite sure whether you're watching a factual documentary or you're watching a film.
It's taken us so much of the last decade, have with IWC, taken the brand into this space of a real cool factor. But you have to be able to back that up with the product for all of that to have any meaning at all. And you have this incredible range of products, which leads me to the question I've most wanted to ask you, which I think is probably your single most difficult job. How on earth do you decide which watch to wear every day?
It's I think, like I would say to any of our customers, this has to be a purely emotional decision. There isn't a ton of logic to that, to be honest. I think you have to feel a certain way. It's this whole space that also makes many people so nervous, and why I think this industry is also quite specific, is because so much of what we do is led by a certain gut feeling, a certain instinct, and trying to feel the zeitgeist of the moment. And this can be your day on a Thursday morning, how you're feeling, how your day is going to be, and what makes you feel better and what elevates you. Or it could be the trend, it could be the way that retail is developing, anything, colors are developing. It's not an exact science. You kind of have to constantly project, and you have to do your best to try and feel what is right for that moment. And this is the same, when people say to me, "What watch would you recommend for me?" I said, "Well, you have to feel it on your wrist. I'm not going to tell you it's going to be this one." And sometimes we're very surprised, and people try on things I would have never guessed would work on their wrist, and suddenly it's perfect. And you can see it in their eyes because they feel elevated. It lifts you. It's like a good suit. It's anything like that. It should lift you. And not just once, every day for many, 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 many years. And that's the same way I choose watches as well. It's my mood is, do I want to feel serious today? Do I want to feel self-assured and confident? Do I want to feel playful? Do I want to feel relaxed and laid back? So clearly, if I'm spending a day with the family in the mountains, I make very different watch choices to, a day at presentations. It's a different thing. It's a bit like, it's like your armor, right? You put it on and you just want to, it gives you confidence.
It does. It lifts you. I'm going to come back to that with one last one. But before I do, you talk about it being personal. This piece, for instance, the one I'm wearing today, is hugely personal for me. And it's genuinely a big part of why I am so enamored with the IWC brand. Yes, you make incredible watches. Yes, you've got this wonderful history going back. But the fact that you're so vested in Laureus, which means so much to me, gives me another reason to really believe in what you do. And it's such an incredible partnership because it's a great example of a brand not just writing a check and saying, right, well, this is for a greater cause, we'll get some nice photos and away we go. And this watch, I think, exemplifies that better than anything. This is the Sport for Good watch, this being the Da Vinci. And every year you create this piece with the piece of artwork on the back from a kid somewhere around the world. And it's become very much part of the DNA of IWC that Laureus is such a driving part of what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, it's a fantastic organization, a fantastic cause, a fantastic charity with fantastic people behind, which is great. Also, for me, especially since being a dad, this idea of children and sports is very close to my heart. My background is in sports. I did, sort of semi-professional sports during the army. So the idea that, the power of change that sport can bring, I believe in firmly anyway. And I think in being a formative part of young people's development, I can't think of anything better than sports to achieve that. And I see it now, my oldest son is now 16. He's an avid canoeist on the River Rhine. And you can see how much that discipline and that focus of going training 6-7 times a week really keeps him out of all sorts of trouble, right? And I think it cannot be underestimated. And since, especially if you're in a busy family setting, especially for boys as well, they need role models that are outside the home, and then you have these sports coaches, trainers coming in who become these role models. And it's really, really important in young people's development and building that character and building that, just that sense of self, I think, in that formative years. And then, of course, bringing that together with children all around the world and being so locally based. And like you say, it's not about writing a check. It's about people putting their commitment in to making a real difference to children in individual projects. That's what I love about Laureus. And then also the approach that I don't want this to be an advertising tool, right? We want this to be because we know, especially in watchmaking, how important it is to build a generation of young people that have skills, perspective, drive, and that, are looking for opportunities that we can hopefully provide in the end, and to invest there is the best way you can invest into the future, I think. And Laurie has done an amazing amount of work that I'm quietly proud to be a part of.
Well, it's a wonderful philosophy to have, and I know that Laureus wouldn't be where it is today without the IWC support. And it's one of many reasons for falling in love with the brand. And it's one I think you will see possibly with an element of surprise from time to time when on Instagram or on the cover of a magazine up pops another superstar and they're wearing an IWC watch, but it's not one that you've sent to them. It's not one you've paid them to wear. There's just somebody who's really famous. Does that still give you a kick? Do you still get a bit of a thrill?
Yes,
when you say,
of
oh my
course.
goodness, there's The Rock wearing an IWC.
Always. It's you're looking for these kind of things all the time, and especially, for me, as a side story to that, not just famous people. It really, when I started at IWC, like one of the first things I saw was Top Gun. I had just launched when I joined. And I couldn't make sense of why we have these watches, but why I don't find this sort of in the actual Top Gun, and I can't find any photos anywhere. And I set out to really make that story, which it was, and that license, a reality. And we started off with one pilot in Lemoore in California and one watch on wrist that we made specifically for that unit. And we scaled it from there. And then to see how that professional aviation face has started to grow and be something, and now having many thousand watches on professional pilots all around the world, but every time you see that somewhere on a wrist, isn't in a cockpit somewhere, or be it on a photograph or in some promo clip, and then you see even like the actors from Top Gun Maverick that all have actual military Top Gun watches. Only exception that the Navy ever made said, okay, you guys represented the Navy pilots, you can actually wear them. And when you see now in, for example, a recent example from Mission Impossible, and you see these watches on the red carpet, because people are proud that they were part of that other movie and proud of that achievement, it gives me a huge buzz, I think, because it's genuine. People don't have to wear these watches. No.
But they do, and that is the important part. You've got the space up to such an exciting one, but you don't strike me as somebody who sits down and reflects on laurels and says, right, well, we've done enough. No. There's always that sense of where are we going? Because the competition will as well.
What wasn't a word? We're constructively dissatisfied, something like that.
So what is there next 5-10 years? What still excites you? What gets you leaping out of bed, slipping into your suit and watch for the day and deciding, right, away I go again?
Yeah, no, I think, look, there's so many building blocks to this journey. When I took over, the first thing we really wanted and needed to do was to integrate more of our manufacturing. I was very lucky to design and implement our new factory, the Manufakturzentrum, bring in much more of the movement manufacturing, case manufacturing, and that gave us the base to then really drive that R&D initiative and get to some really cool stuff like shock absorber, Cerelume, the Eternal Canada last year that won the Grand Prix, which is an amazing achievement when you see the people, the equipment, the infrastructure you're putting in, and then stuff like that starts coming out, which just shows that it's working. Then it's all about, taking that and building a very, very sharply defined brand around it, around this idea of engineering, and making it consistent and bringing that energy through the website, the print, the social media, the boutique environment, and really getting that to feel tight and feel close together. And then really building it globally. The name is International Watch Company. We came to markets like the US quite late, well, quite early on in China, but the US quite late, and seeing that now grow and develop. And there's a couple of things like that, the Middle East, Latin America, US. And this is really, what we want to do is really bring great continuity, great quality, great timepieces, load that up globally with great stories that people fall in love with, and then hopefully activate that in the way that people just enjoy timepieces. It's such a nice industry. People come to us for the love of something they don't need to focus on, but they love to focus on, and that's something. It's a really good starting point. It's just great connections from that.
A number of years ago, I had Skulk Berger, the rugby player I think you've met at the Dunhill, on the show, and I asked him the question about if there's one thing in the house that you'll take if it catches fire and you run out with. He said his dog. He said his golf clubs, and his wife didn't speak to him for a week. So I'll rephrase it ever so slightly so as not to get you into trouble. But if there is that one piece from your personal collection, from the great IWC museum, which I've been lucky enough to spend some time in Schaffhausen, one piece that not necessarily is the single greatest, most expensive, most famous watch you've ever made, but to go back to your point about it being such a personal choice, what is that one watch that over the years, over time, has struck the strongest chord with you?
Well, I think it would have changed over time at various stages, obviously. If you ask me right now, I think I would always first grab my Ingenieur Automatic stainless steel black dial, because it's been such a journey to bring that great Gerald Genta legacy back to life. It was a 5-year plus project, and I really identify with it, and I also really identify with the result and the fact that we managed to get it to where it needs to be, with great support and blessing from Madame Genta and her daughter and the Gerald Genta Heritage Foundation, which was fantastic. And that's something I'm really quite proud of, to bring that back, because the Ingenieurs had many iterations over the years. I think we just actually launched a historic little film called Our Most Brilliant Failure, which actually explains that the original Genta Ingenieur was way ahead of its time. It was marketed to engineers at a time when everybody else marketed to the rich and famous, and probably it was a little bit misunderstood. And we only ever made just short of 600 of these original Genta design watches, where we know some other Genta design sports watches have done quite well in the meantime in the last 45 years. And then there were a lot of iterations and a lot of confusion. And then if you take something like that out of the design cryo chamber of history, and you start to say, okay, how do I combine a modern sports watch that works today with keeping that essence of the DNA alive and bringing that together in a meaningful way, and create something not just for a year or 2 years or 3 years, but where I can build a legacy for another 50 years plus. It's not an easy process, as we found out, right? And watchmaking is very different from architecture, because in architecture you computer render, you know what you're building, you build 95% of that, and then the rest you fix with lighting and deco. Watches don't work like that at all. And that was a steep learning curve, and I'm incredibly proud we made it. And this is, at the moment, for me, the watch that I would always go to.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent choice, but as you say, there could have been many over the years, and there'll be many more to come.
Yes, there were.
And I think that's what makes it quite so exciting. Chris, thank you. It's been lovely spending some time with you. Thank you again for everything you do for Laureus, because it means so much to us as a Laureus family. And I look forward to many more conversations, many more fabulous watches, and seeing this great F1 movie hit the screens very shortly.
Yeah, June 27th, not too long now.
So there we go. We cannot legally reveal whether or not Chris did do the stunt double work for Brad Pitt. That was on the list of questions we're not allowed to ask. You're in for a great movie, though, and you're in for a lot of excitement. Our very special guest in the very first IWC boutique in Africa on the Dan Nicholl Show this week, Chris Grainger-Herr.
You're listening to The Dan Nicholl Show.